Excellent. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Um, After a little break, unfortunately, we didn't manage before the break to finish looking at the Geonim. So people, I'm afraid, will thus have to cope with interruption. But on we go, and we were looking at the remarkable life and achievements of amongst the Geonim. The Geonim is a vast period of time, but we had arrived up to Rav Gaon, born 882, died 942 and a remarkable figure, towering figure, the first Gaon in Bavel in Iraq, who is born and emerges from Egypt, a fighter against the Karaites, a restorer of or defender of the Babylonian Pharaonic practice in calculating the calendar, and whose force and forceful personality restores unity in the divide about how to something as basic and fundamental about how to calculate the calendar. A polemical writer, a halachist of supreme importance and competence, and a translator of the Torah, and a translation still used in some shape and form to this day. And in addition, the author of a major philosophical work, written in Arabic and Judeo-Arabic and translated into Hebrew, at which point the Ashkenazim and the provincial Jews and the non-Arabic Jews could reach it, translated by the Ibn Tabun family. And the first canonical Jewish philosopher. Presumably Jews did philosophy before Rav Gaon. We know of Karaites who write philosophical works, but the first sort of philosophical work that enters the mainstream and written by an orthodox, anachronistic term, an orthodox figure, is Rav Gaon's Emunah V'Deus, which translates as a book of beliefs and views or beliefs and opinions or something of the sort. And in it, he lays the foundations of belief in accordance with the line of philosophical thinking. Now, his significance as the first Jewish philosopher is enormous. He launches a whole array of Jewish philosophical works, of which, of course, the most famous and most studied remains to this day, the Rambam's Moreh Nevuchim, the Rambam's Guide to the Perplexed. In some respects, Rav Gaon's sort of influence and popularity was superseded by that of the Rambam. The Rambam, who is 250 years later, 300 years later, and I think largely considered to have tidied up philosophy and fine-tuned and tweaked and improved the philosophy of Rav Gaon. Nonetheless, Lo Mishpat HaBechorah to Rav Gaon belongs the right of the firstborn. He is the one who launches this, at least on an official level, launches this project, this endeavor. We mentioned, I'm not going to go through this again, that Rav Gaon is very influenced by a particular school of philosophy, the Kalam. Literal meaning of Kalam is something like the speakers or rhetoricians. The Rambam calls them, in the translation of the Rambam, they're referred to as the Kat HaMedabrim, the sect of talkers, sect of speakers. I've never known if the Rambam is saying that somewhat sarcastically because he thinks they just speak and speak, because he doesn't like them. But Rav Gaon is a member of the Kalam. He's a Mutzah Kalam. He's a member of this school of Arabic philosophy. And of course, the Arabs engage in philosophy for similar reasons to those which eventually the Jews, led by Rav Gaon, do. Because of the classic, really, the heart of all Jewish philosophy gets down to the question of revelation versus reason. So the Greeks teach us to reason. They teach us to use our minds to think about philosophical and scientific truths. The Torah reveals to us philosophical, theological, and factual, perhaps even scientific truths through revelation. So we have a problem over here. What is the respective place of revelation and what's the respective place of reason? Why do we need revelation if we have reason? Can we define what revelation can tell us that reason can't? And what happens when there's a clash between the two? How do we deal with that? So that's where, in a sense, all Jewish philosophy starts. And out of that rich and fruitful encounter between Greek philosophy and Jewish revelation emerges this whole realm. Of course, Christians get there and also deal with this, and so much sort of rich, fruitful discussion has emerged. Now, the critics of philosophy argue several points. They argue that why philosophy is philosophy? Why bother thinking about it at all? We have revelation. We know about the world from God Himself, the author and creator of the world. So why worry about that? If you are an eyewitness to an event, and you see a crime being performed, and then a Sherlock Holmes detective comes along and, using deduction, reasons what happens. And the two conflict with each other. Who are you going to believe? Of course, you'll believe what you saw. You saw it. You don't need to rely on piecing together flimsy pieces of evidence. You saw things yourself. So the opponents of Greek philosophy say, look, we have God himself who tells us in the Torah, eyewitness account about the creation world. So maybe there's some flimsy pieces of evidence about things working a little differently, but who cares? We've seen things. We've seen God's revelation himself. The supporters of philosophy, led by Rav Gaon and on, would say, no, God has given us reason. On some level or other, we have to attempt at least to align the two. Reason itself is the greatest gift that humans have been given. Reason perhaps is the very tool through which we encounter God and godliness and spirituality, and therefore how can we ignore reason? So this is the first sort of disagreement between the two schools of thought. And the second disagreement is the claim that introducing Greek philosophy into Jewish thinking has introduced a profoundly un-Jewish, non-Jewish way of thinking. We do things organically. We deal with theology through narrative, through medrash, from within the Beit HaMedrash, not externalizing. All philosophy is sort of taking this neutral, unbiased external look at things. We much like perhaps studying a foreign language in the classroom, we do things organically. We immerse ourselves in that culture. You have a deeper relationship to Torah if that's the culture within and the Beit HaMedrash within which you have been immersed, rather than if you come as an outsider where you're always sort of weighing up competing views, and the whole philosophical endeavor is doomed to weaken loyalty, emunah, mesiras nefesh, the ability to dedicate and sacrifice one's life to these causes. If you believe because that's all you know and all you've lived, and you've encountered God in your life through spiritual experiences, you may have the strength of character when called upon to sacrifice your life for faith and belief. If your belief is founded on philosophy, well, you can always argue like this, and you can argue like this, and it's a judgment call. Will you really have the strength of your conviction to make considerable sacrifices, which is, after all, ultimately what Judaism calls upon us to do? It calls upon us to make sacrifices of livelihood for Shabbos, expensive kosher food, and ultimately, on occasion, great sacrifices well beyond that. And in fact, on Shabbos, we were talking about the post-expulsion move of the Sephardi world away from philosophy. The Spanish Sephardi world was traumatized by their experience of the expulsion, the Inquisition, and what they saw, or many saw, as an incredible failure. The Ashkenazi world, 200 years before in the Crusades, had demonstrated an ability to fight shmad, to fight the pressures of conversion in an extraordinary way, right? We think the rate of bowing to conversion under the pressures of the Crusades was below 0.1%, less than 1 in 1,000, probably even 1 in 100,000 is an exaggeration of the statistics. And yet, the Spanish world looked back on its performance, the Sephardi world looked back on its performance after the expulsion, in which a full third of Jews chose to stay in Spain and not leave. We can't judge them. They faced terrible travails in traveling across the Mediterranean. Presumably, many of them thought this will pass. This is just a wave. We'll take on Christianity on an external level, and we will re-engage with Judaism very shortly. They had commitments, livelihood commitments, perhaps elderly parents, perhaps children. So again, I'm not judging anyone, but the Sephardi world looked back with a sense of shame. How could it be that we failed so abysmally at this time? Now there are other explanations that one could come up with. One can't necessarily compare the sword of the Crusaders to the much more urbane and civilized so-called manner in which the Spanish authorities dealt with things. There may be many other explanations, but certainly the Sephardi world looked back on this, led by many of their leaders, and they said this has happened because of philosophy. Philosophy is too weak. An engagement with Jewish identity is too nuanced, it's too subtle, it's too integrationist. We have become assimilationist in a degree. We have become very Spanish. We've become very integrated into our society and into our world. And this led to a failure, a weakness in our conviction. And with that, the Sephardi world really ran very, very fast away from philosophy and towards Kabbalah. And really, without overgeneralizing, Ever since, there's been no significant Jewish philosophy done in the vast majority of the Sephardi refugee world. At least those that went towards the Mediterranean basewards, and in that direction. Perhaps those who went northwards slightly differently. I'm not commenting on the truth or untruth of this theory. I'm simply stating a historical fact that leading figures such as the Chassid Yavets, the generation of leaders in the pre and post expulsion era, claim that this was the impact of philosophy. So Saadia Gaon introduces really from the year 900 to the year, let's call it 1500, a 600-year project of very significant Jewish engagement with philosophy. Presumably Jews have been doing it before that also. We have evidence of some Jews doing it beforehand. But Saadia Gaon is the first great rabbinic leader, publishing around the year 933 in the Common Era his book of Emunah v'Dayot. So let's go back to discussing the contents of the book. We discussed his words in which he describes the purpose and method of the book to explain and defend the principles of Jewish faith against skeptics like Karaites and Muslims, against Greek philosophical influenced thinkers. And he's going to combine rational thought, kalam, with revelation, and he's going to argue that reason confirms to the truths revealed in the Torah, and that reason and revelation can't contradict. I think we spoke about this last time at length. None of those statements are obvious. As we've just explained, even the very endeavor, the very project of trying to align reason and revelation opens a Pandora's box, opens a can of worms. It gives legitimacy to reason, even when confronting and clashing revelation. And as I tried to share, once that Pandora's box is opened, you can't really close it. So the post, let's say, expulsion of Spain, retreat from philosophy, never completely manages to undo what happened. That the Kabbalists still are forced to argue once someone opens complexity and the use of reason and Greek language, even if you're going to dismiss philosophy, you have to use the tools of philosophy to do that. You can never rid yourself of that niggling voice. You can never rid yourself of the need to use that sort of language. So if you want to explain to someone that you disagree with reason, the only way you can do that is by using the tools of reason to explain that you disagree with reason. So Saadia Gaon is really that figure who opens that Pandora's box. We discussed his views about sources of knowledge, empirical evidence, or we can call that sense perception, rational intuition, inference, and tradition, and we discussed his views around that. We also discussed his rules, which are very, very important and remain topical to this day, about what to do when there is a clash between the two, and when are we entitled to reinterpret Pashutoi Shel Mikra, the simplest understanding of the Psukim. And he gives a number of principles. You can reinterpret Psukim when there's empirical evidence against it. You can reinterpret Psukim when there is very elementary, basic reason, logical, deductive reason against this. You can reinterpret Psukim when there's very strong inductive reason against this, and we spoke about the difference between the two. You can reinterpret Psukim from Pshat when there's a contradiction within Psukim themselves, and you can reinterpret Psukim when there's a tradition of Chazal to so do. Now, the last two categories, reinterpreting Psukim when there's a contradiction or when there's a tradition, is the bread and butter of Gemara. That's in a sense what Gemara does. Again, now is not the forum to discuss why would there be ostensible contradictions, why would we have tradition that seems to take Psukim out of their Pshat. But either way, Chazal certainly understood that somewhat of a metaphorical or non-literal reading of Psukim is sometimes justified, unless there's evidence to the contrary. So those two categories aren't that controversial in the sense everyone does that when we learn Gemara. But the earlier categories of reinterpreting Psukim based upon reason or empirical evidence seems more mechudesh, seems more innovative. And Saadia Gaon indeed does this in a way which we all continue to do to this day. He says all the physical definitions, the anthropomorphic definitions of God, are metaphor, they're not literal. So when we talk about God's hands, Yod Chazaka, Zraya Natuya, the eyes of God, all of these should be interpreted metaphorically, and of course the Rambam famously follows in this, but we all do it without thinking. So none of us, in a sense, notice or are bothered that we're using human reason against Psukim. But we are doing that. Human reason tells us that if God is unified, if God is above time and space, if no description is possible of God, if God is a complete unity, then any description is delineating, is limiting, brings multiplicity. I'm not going to rehash all these philosophical arguments, but all of these are points of philosophical reason. We could have taken a very different stance, and we could have said, well, God is capable of anything, and therefore if God chooses to embody himself, let him so do. Who are we to say that he can't embody himself? Now, does the Torah tell us God has no form and the like? Not entirely clearly. Is this a contradiction within Torah itself? Well, we like to think so, and we say so, but if you read the Psukim with care, they say you didn't see, remember, don't make a mistake, you didn't see any image of God or any form of God on Har Sinai. Well, that may mean a theological truth, which is because God has no form, and that's definitely the way it's been traditionally understood. But you could read it differently, which is God chose to show no form, or we humans are incapable of perceiving God's form because it's overwhelming, it's very powerful. It's sometimes children are told the analogy, but the analogy really comes from the Gemara itself that you can't see God. Look, you can't even look at the sun, which is one of God's lesser servants. Can you stare at the sun without being blinded? Kal v'chomer, how much more so can you expect to be able to perceive and look at God? Now, that isn't really an argument for saying God has no material existence. That's saying that God's material existence is overwhelming and blinding. Okay, that's something else. But does God have no form at all? Maybe you could argue that this is a chutzpah, a cheek. Who are we to argue with the Psukim that say God has eyes and arms and the like? And indeed, there are thinkers here and there scattered through Jewish history who take this viewpoint. Rav Gaon is very firmly against that, and we all sort of assume that without even thinking about it too much. Okay. What else does Rav Gaon discuss? Forgive me again if I'm repeating things a little bit. I don't remember entirely where we got up to last time, but I think we discussed this. Yesh me'ayin, creation ex nihilo, as it's known, creation from nothing. He puts forward one of the classic arguments for creation against an eternal universe. Let's just again remind ourselves of a little bit of background here. He is battling this composite Aristotle-Plato figure, which is the Greek philosopher that the Arabs had. They due to confusion in translation and transmission of Greek philosophical ideas when they were first translated into Arabic, the Arabs and the Jewish philosophers who followed through from the Gaon to the Rambam thought of themselves as followers of Aristotle, but actually in many ways they were Platonic. They were also influenced by Plato's thinkers. They had this sort of composite figure. Either way, the Greek and Platonic thinkers certainly are not atheists. They believe in God. Perhaps they're deists. They don't believe in a God that can intervene in human affairs. And the Greek thinkers resolve belief in an eternal universe with God as a first cause. We think that you need to have a finite universe created at a point in time in order to believe in God as a first cause. And the Greeks didn't agree. The Greeks thought that you can have God as a first cause and have a universe that is eternal. Because when we speak about first cause, we don't mean temporally. We don't mean God as the first cause in the sense that he came before creation in time. We mean that God is before creation in the causal chain. Let me give you an example of how something can be both concurrent in time and yet forward in the causal chain. And this is not my example. This is the Rambam's Mon Avruchim. If you hold a spring down, so the spring is being held down. Imagine eternally I'm holding the spring down. So the spring is held down by me. I'm the first cause. I'm the cause of the spring being held down on the one hand. And on the other hand, it is concurrent. It's not temporally proceeding. So the Greeks, again, I'm not here to discuss whether you like that piece of philosophy or not. We're just saying that this is what the Greeks believed. They believed that God was the first cause. The absolute cause of existence. They believed in a God of sorts, and at the same time, a God, an eternal universe. Now, the two Greek ideas seem to go together in the sense that an eternal universe also lends itself to a universe in which God cannot interfere. A God who is a creator clearly is involved with creation and therefore could be involved with creation on an ongoing basis. A God who is the other sort of first cause in an eternal universe, it's less clear to see if the universe is eternal. If you think about it, like the one way of thinking about it like this is every miracle or every intervention of God in creation is in a sense a new act of creation. If creation is a series of logical steps, of scientific steps, of cause and effect, with rules to it, because creation functions in a certain way, every miracle is a rupture of those rules. Every miracle, by definition, is an innovation. It's bringing something new in, because the natural flow of cause and effect would cause a certain outcome. I take an object and I drop it, I would expect it to fall to the ground. If it doesn't fall to the ground through miraculous intervention, that means there's a breach of science, there's a new creativity that has occurred. The Greeks in resisting creation are because they're rationalists. They don't like creation. They like a world that follows rational functionality and cause and effect and laws of nature. So the two theories are somewhat intertwined. An eternal universe and a universe in which God isn't involved, is a deist, a God who isn't involved in human affairs. Rav Saadia Gaon takes the classic understanding of the Pesukim, which suggests a finite universe, a universe that's created in a point in time, and he argues that not only is there first cause, but the universe can't be eternal. Anything made of finite points, he assumes the universe is finite in space and finite in time. And I think we discussed last time how, in many ways, the Greek view of an infinitely long and big universe dominated until Einstein, really. One of the consequences of Einstein is an expanding universe. If you're in an expanding universe, we're not in this changeless universe that's absolutely static. If you expand the clock backwards, if the universe is expanding outwards in time, if you turn the clock back, it seems that the universe started off from a singularity, a single point, the so-called Big Bang, calculated back to about 13.8 billion years. We're doing great, right? So now we're in a universe in which time and space itself comes into existence, and we discussed, I think, again last time, some of what that meant. Rav Saadia Gaon doesn't go into any of this. This is all modern thought, but Rav Saadia Gaon argues for a universe that comes into existence as a singularity in the sense of time and space coming into existence. What happened before the creation of the world? There is no before because there is no time. That's an insight that was known before Rav Saadia Gaon. Jews believed in creation, but it's spelt out by Rav Saadia Gaon most clearly. And I think this is where we got up to. This is chapter 2. And Rav Saadia Gaon then continues with that and says, if God has created within time and space, that implies omnipotence, all-powerful God. It implies will and purpose to existence. And of course, this is very important also to Jews, because here we get to moral differences between Greek thinkers and Jewish thinkers. If God created the universe as a free-willed, chosen act, not as some sort of eternal God, statically and eternally holding the spring down, maintaining the universe as a first cause, but a God who chose to bring us into existence. We are now viewing God as a free agent. Viewing God as a free agent implies his will and purposefulness, and with that comes to the fore the possibility of humans making a difference, of human achievement, of human purposefulness, and of the whole moral code that follows. And Saadia Gaon will get back to that when he talks about BeHa and other such things. Okay, this is somewhat, I think, of a chazorah of last time. Is this okay? Any thoughts or questions? We've rushed through. I think we dealt with a greater length last time, but I think nonetheless this is useful. Yes.
What you said is that we're at the point with Saadia Gaon that he says that God has free will.
Yes.
That actually transferred to man having free will then.
It doesn't, but it creates the possibility of man having free will. If you're in a universe which isn't just purely, if man isn't just a static mechanical part of a static mechanical universe, bound inexorably by laws of nature, by cause and effect, then there's a possibility of man having free will. That's mathematically speaking. And morally and logically speaking, if God has a will and a purpose for creation, then we can imagine ourselves living in a universe that has a purposefulness to it. Purposefulness or oughtness is the very foundation stone of morality. A world which just is doesn't have ought. A world which has God, a creator who has an ought and a will, is a world in which morality can exist. Morality is predicated on free will, so presumably. So we don't think lions make moral mistakes by eating innocent deer. So that's the equation. That's why this is important Jewishly. The Rambam doesn't quite agree with this. The Rambam says, look, if the Greeks would have found a proof that the universe was eternal, then we would have lived with this. And he doesn't go too far down this path, but he argues that we can live with it. What's with Bereshis bara Elokim? Well, we'd have to say that Pasuk doesn't mean literally, it doesn't mean in time. How can we do that? Well, we've already established that we can reinterpret Pasukim if there are clear knockouts, philosophical proofs. However, says the Rambam, there is no philosophical proof because I don't think this is true, and we've never found a philosophical proof for this, and therefore we don't have to confront that problem. But if we would, we would deal with it. I don't think Saadia Gaon goes down that. To the best of my knowledge, I don't think Saadia Gaon goes down that path, and he just proves a temporal universe. He thinks the idea of an eternal universe is a mistake, and and doesn't address that. Okay, the next chapter of Rav Saadia Gaon deals with God, the unity of God. And I kind of touched on this a little bit before when I spoke about anthropomorphism and so on. So let me just very quickly run through this. He says God is one, God is eternal, God is indivisible. Any multiplicity would involve lack of unity, would involve limitation, which contradicts God's perfection, and therefore God is not physical and can have no body. So let me just run through a little bit the reasoning of this. So if God is complete unity, that must mean he has no parts, because parts are dividable or divisible. So let's say that a little bit more fully. If God is physical or material, then again he is divisible and therefore not complete unity. So again, let's just explain this idea. When we say God is one, we don't just mean he's one, we mean he is one. He is complete unity. If we consider this table in many respects is not complete unity. Firstly, it's not complete unity because there are other tables. Okay, let's say this was the only table in existence. It still wouldn't be complete unity because it is made up of parts. In what way is it made up of parts? Well, it has a top and it has legs, so it has different aspects to it. Let's remove the legs. Would it then be complete unity? No, because it's physical. As soon as it's physical, it is divisible. So it has the right of the table and the left of the table. This, the front of the table, the back of the table. So as soon as you have anything that's material that has extension to it, it ceases to be unity, complete unity. And therefore, we describe God as complete unity, complete simplicity. No description can be given of him. Any language we use about him must be in some respects, and we'll talk about that in a moment, in what respects metaphorical, because nothing can be ultimately said about him. A different way of putting this is that conceptually, if we can say anything about God, then we're again back to the problems of parts. So if I can say about this table, leaving aside its material extension, but I can say it's brown, it's made of wood or plastic, then again it's divisible conceptually. It has multiple descriptions to it. It's sliceable, not just sliceable physically, the right of the table and the left of the table, or the top of the table and the legs of the table, but sliceable conceptually. It has a color, it has a texture, it has a shape. Or to put this in more philosophical language, it lacks complete unity because it's a member of a class. So even if there is only one lion in existence, it is nonetheless a member of a class of animals, a class of physical. Do you mind just turning it off, Lennon? I don't know if that's yours. That's down to. I just get distracted. It's a member of a class, a member of a category of physical objects, of animals, and anything which is a member of a class again has description to it, and therefore isn't complete unity. So this is really the point that the Rav Saadia Gaon makes, that God is indivisible, he's complete unity. Part of it is also he has to be eternal, because again, otherwise we can slice God temporally. Not eternal in the sense of existing forever and ever and ever and ever, but rather eternal in the sense of being above time. If God existed within time, then again we could slice him. Just like the table, which has material extension, is sliceable. There's the right of the table and the left of the table. If God exists in time, when we use the word infinity, we mean one of two things. We either mean large, ever just going on and on and on and on, or we mean above space. When we say eternal, we can either mean just going on and on and on, or we mean above time. And Saadia Gaon means the latter category. If God is infinite in the sense of he's just very, very large, he just goes on and on and on, then again, he's sliceable. There's this part of God and that part of God. If he's temporally within time, just forever, exists forever, then he's sliceable in time. There's this time of God's existence and that time of God's existence. When we say God is infinite and eternal, we mean he's above time and above space. And all these points are made really by Rav Saadia Gaon. Out of that, therefore, emerges the other principle we discussed, which is that God can have no body, and therefore all bodily descriptions of God are anthropomorphic, because if God has a body, then again he's material and spatial, and God can't be material and spatial. Now, what do we mean when we see the physical? What do we do with the physical descriptions of God? So Rav Saadia Gaon answers, they all really refer to his abilities, his abilities, his actions. When we say God has eyes, this is borrowed language to say that he's aware of us, he sees, he perceives. When we say God has an arm, Zeraya Natuya, Yad Chazaka, like in the Mitzrayim stories that we're just learning at the moment, we mean that he's powerful, that he's all powerful, he's able to do things. Rav Saadia Gaon doesn't go as far as the Rambam in fine-tuning or nuancing this piece of philosophy. And here I just want to spend a moment explaining the later developments of the Rambam in Mo Nevuchim around these ideas, which Rav Saadia Gaon doesn't get to. So I mentioned Mo Nevuchim in some ways supersedes the thinking of Rav Saadia Gaon. There's a subtlety or nuance in this that the Rambam is aware of, the Saadia Gaon doesn't demonstrate awareness of. Sorry, Gabi, yes.
Just on that point, we read yesterday, and Hashem remembered, and that was said before about Sarah. Is that the same kind of language?
Yes.
Does that mean he remembered?
Yes, he's above time. So you're saying he knows it all anyway, doesn't need to remember. So that means probably there the word memory means he deems as relevant or something like that. But yes, it's in the literal translation of the word zocher is not so clear. Zocher may mean mention as opposed to remember. It may mean a certain degree of action based on awareness rather than awareness alone. Whenever the Torah tells us there's a mitzvah to remember, Chazal understood it to mean through speech or action. So, for example, zocher sashal salacha Amalek doesn't just mean remember Amalek, but mention Amalek, which is why we read Parshat Zocher. Zechirat Mitzrayim means say Kriyat Shema, say words of memory and so on. So Zocher probably doesn't just mean an abstract intellectual awareness. It's probably a slight mistranslation from the Hebrew to the English, and probably means some expression of the memory. In which case, when we say God remembered Zechotavot or whatever it is, the Ovis and Amos, and therefore chose to redeem the people, it probably means some level of acting upon that memory or the like. So it could be metaphorical language. It could be really just a mistranslation of what the word Zocher means.
It's an infection, but definitely, it's a bridge almost too far.
So all language has a translation problem. That's clear. And one of the difficulties of learning Torah is a translation problem from Hebrew to English. But Saadia Gaon is making the point that certainly when we're trying to use language to capture the infinite, there's a breakdown of language. Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's the end of chapter 6. Like God knew.
Yes.
Well, he knows everything.
So again, it could be a mistranslation as opposed to this sort of thing. Yediyah may mean intimate awareness or intimate connection. For example, it says, now, presumably he knew the history. Lo yodat Yosef, he didn't know of Yosef. So Yoda probably means know Yosef as opposed to know of Yosef. In English, we use one word. If I know someone or I know of them, we use the same word. In Hebrew, it's probably two concepts. Yediyah probably means a direct, intimate, personal knowledge as opposed to knowing of someone. And therefore, Lo yodat Yosef means he didn't know Yosef as opposed to didn't know of Yosef. When we talk about Yediyat Hashem, by the way, which is a mitzvah, we don't mean just to know of God, we may mean to know God, to have a relationship with God. Famously, the biblical know, Adam knew Chava, Vayeda Adam and Chava and so on, is the reason that word is used is because it doesn't mean know of, it means know. There's an intimate relationship there going on, a relationship, emotional, spiritual, physical, depth of connection. That's probably what the word means. But again, it means all these things are subject to discussion.
This person's love.
We use it in English know that way, but the problem is we use it both ways.
Yes.
So we have the same word to know of and to know. So we definitely use know in the intimate, direct way, but we also use know in the indirect way, whereas in Hebrew, they're two separate words. Okay. So this is something that Saadia Gaon spells out. In this sense, he anticipates later philosophers like Rambam, but he doesn't quite go as far. And the Rambam introduces two nuances that Rav Saadia Gaon doesn't recognize or acknowledge. And let me just explain them. Now, when we say let me explain first of all, speak out the one that Rav Saadia Gaon does recognize and the one that he doesn't recognize. And this actually connects a little bit to Gabi's point also. Let's say the Yud Gimel Midas Rachamim. So we say God is just, God is merciful. Rachum, he's Chanun, he's generous, he's free giving, Chanun, he gives freely, and so on. Is this philosophically a problem? It says Rav Saadia Gaon, even this is philosophically a problem. Because if God is just, when I say Gabi is a just person, Andrew is a merciful person, I'm describing an attribute, a quality of their personality. Now, if that is indeed a description of a quality of your personality, there are two problems with that. The first is it means that you are not acting freely. You are acting as a result of your quality of personness. If I say, I don't know, someone possesses this quality of justice or mercy, then the reason they are merciful to someone is because this is how they are. This is their nature. So the idea of describing, by the way, the Hebrew word used for qualities of personalities reflects this in a midah, right? Good midot. A midah means a measure of personality. Now, a measure of personality, this is not a classical Hebrew word, by the way, it's a word that was introduced by the philosophers, actually. But the point is that Yudgimul midot is used in that way, is a measure or a limitation or delineation. So there's two problems with this. The first is it takes away God's free will. God has to be a free agent, a creator, and he isn't free in so doing. And the second problem with this is, and by the way, takes away, in a sense, relationship and agency and everything that we're looking for in our relationship to God. And the second problem is, again, it gets back to being a description of God. And even descriptions are limiting. Because if I say he's merciful, he again has parts. There's an aspect of him or an element of him that's merciful. Philosophically, in a sense, there's the same problem saying he's green or blue or saying he's merciful. These are, again, descriptions, and we're unable to apply those. So Rav Saadia Gaon basically makes the following distinction. He says, attributes that imply essence are applicable, like existence. You can say God exists, a unity, God is one. Attributes that are linked to action describe how God acts, not how God is himself. So when we say God is just, what we mean is he does justice. When we say he's merciful, what we mean is he does mercy. The Rambam really tweaks this in two ways. The first point is the Rambam doesn't think we can even say things about God's existence. We can't really say God exists or God is unified, is unity. And because even the word existence is a limiting word. What do we mean by existence? Well, everything exists. Yeah, but all existence we know is temporal, spatial, is physical, is captured within the world of existence. God more than exists. Or we get to the famous via negativa, the negative path of the Rambam. What we mean is God doesn't not exist. So saying God exists is really saying he doesn't not exist. It's not that he doesn't exist because he's less than exists. He doesn't exist because he more than exists. Any word, if I want to say God is infinite, the Rambam points out that really what I'm saying is, again, negative theology, negative description. There isn't a word in English, at least, in any language I'm aware of, there isn't a word for infinite. It's always a non-word. He's not finite. You can't have a word for infinite because the whole point is it's a negative description. It's a non-delineating description. Anything we can say about God is negative. He's boundaryless. He's above space and time. Above space and time is a negative word. It means he's beyond space and time. Beyond is a negative word. He's not captured within space and time. Even in existence, what I really mean to say is he doesn't exist. He's beyond existence. So the Rambam spells out this famous negative theology of the Rambam in a way that Saadia Gaon didn't fully capture. We casually use this language without noticing it. We describe the creation of the world as yesh me'ayin. Well, chutzpah. Something from nothing? God is nothing? But the Kabbalists say one of the names of God is ayin, is nothingness. They're trying to capture these ideas that were spelled out by the Rambam, that God is nothingness, really. Existence is here. God doesn't exist. He's beyond existence. So humans always strive or reach towards a sort of awareness. We kind of know what we mean when we say above space and time. We kind of know what we mean when we say infinite, and yet we can't quite capture it because we can't capture it in our minds because we can't delineate it, and that's the whole point. God can't be delineated. So even very basic things like unity, we don't mean he's one, he's not one. He doesn't exist, he doesn't not exist, he more than exists, he's beyond oneness. Even one implies a possibility of plurality. There's 2, 3, 4, and therefore we can give something a number of one. God isn't unified in the sense that he's one. He's unified in the sense that he's above the concept of numbers itself. So the Rambam is sort of aware of that frustration at the heart of language, that breakdown of language. All language is descriptive, is delineating, and you can't delineate God. So the Rambam focuses more on the magic of language and the limitations of language. The Rambam again and again says the Moan of Uchim is a book really about language, about human language. That's how he sees his guide to the perplexed. And Rav Saadia Gaon doesn't quite capture that. The reason this is important, by the way, is because the Rambam's, despite the sort of austere nature of philosophy and reason, and many readers of the Rambam who sort of think this is a very cold philosophical system, once you get to this point, you are opening the door to mystery. There is a spirituality in this. There is a magic in this. Many of us, myself included, look to our relationship with Hashem and with religion. As much as I like philosophy and I try and be rationalist, we also have a sense of transcendence and wonder and awe. And Rav Saadia Gaon, you can sometimes lose that sense of transcendence and wonder when you have a very cold philosophy. The Rambam, in that sense, isn't a cold philosopher, because in that longing and that awareness of the limits of language and the frustration at that finite human ability to conceive, and that sort of sense of almost getting there and then retreating backwards, and that sort of frustrating reaching towards and yet never quite being able to embrace, it really lies the heart of mysticism. And the Rambam is aware of this. All mysticism is this longing for this divine union, and a sense that you can't quite get there, and that longing towards it. And the Rambam, in his Moan of Uchim and in his Mishnah Torah, again and again uses language which is very similar to the language of the mystics. He's not unaware of that. He describes, for example, very movingly in his Yesod Torah, the mitzvah of Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem, and he describes the sense of Ava, someone who engages in the wonder of the world and this incredible world within which we live, and an awareness of the sort of all-pervasive divine. And he says you're filled with wonder, you're filled with a sense of closeness to God, and you feel this overwhelming love and you want to reach forward. And he says, as you do that, you're thrown backwards with this sense of the infinite gulf that lies between you and God. And almost all mystics write in this term, in this, using this language, they speak about this sense of thirst and hunger towards God, and then as you approach it, you sort of feel yourself, the Rambam says, you're thrown backwards as you become aware of that gulf. And by the way, I'm sharing this partly because I mean this is a real sense of avoda also. I hope all these shiurim are not just abstract philosophy. As we daven, we are meant to sort of feel that sense of a few moments of stillness in our midah, in which we're aware of the presence of God and sort of aware in our lives and in the world, and then an immediate sense of being thrown back because we realize that he's not in our world, he's beyond, and that all that lies at the heart of it. And again, within the Jewish tradition, within all faith traditions, by the way, this sort of tension between love and awe, the tension of union and then feeling thrown back, it's very personal language that the Rambam is using. The Rambam describes himself as drunk with love of God, and we have descriptions of the Rambam. For us readers, very often, because we're not so philosophically minded, philosophy can come across as austere and cold. The Rambam didn't live in a cold philosophical universe. He lived in a very real, close relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with Hashem, and sorry. I got very easily distracted. I'm speaking. Forgive me. So yeah, he lived in that very close divine connection with godliness, and we find that mirrored in the language of other Jewish mystics also. You know, Kabbalistically, those who come from Hasidic families and say the Kabbalistic L'Shem Yichud, you'll often hear the text talking about with love and awe. And again, they're using the same vocabulary to describe it. Okay, so let's get back to Rav Saadia Gaon. Rav Saadia doesn't demonstrate awareness of this subtlety. Rav Saadia starts the conversation. Rav Saadia speaks about the nature and the unity of God, or you can't even use the word nature. He's aware that any descriptions of God, like justice and mercy, are descriptions of actions, and the Rambam makes that point. But then he says that you can essence of God, we can use as language, and the Rambam points out even when we're talking about the essence of God, there's a breakdown of language. Even saying God exists is really philosophically unsound. Saying God is unity, saying God is all powerful. is unsound. You can mean by that one of two things. He does acts of power, or he's beyond power. What does power mean? Power means he can do anything in the world, right? Power means he can do whatever he wants in existence. That's too limiting. He's more than powerful. We could say he's infinitely powerful, because infinitely powerful is a non-word again, non-finitely powerful. But we can only use negative theology, negative words. When we say God is just, we mean he's more than just. When we say he's merciful, we mean he's more than merciful. He's not limited by mercy. The Rambam, Gaon, doesn't demonstrate awareness of this subtle distinction. He just says the more basic level, which is he draws a distinction between God's existence, about which we can say things, and God's actions, about which we can't say things. Okay, so this is really chapter 3. God's eternal, indivisible, one. He's perfect. He's not physical, has no body, and therefore any expressions in the Torah are metaphor. And the so-called divine attributes, the midos of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, are manifestations of actions, not qualities of God himself. That's chapter 3. Yes?
When the Mazal say Mahu Rachum,
Yeah.
what's the saying?
Yeah, the Rambam says you have to understand these all as anthropomorphic. They're all metaphors. Just like he is beyond mercy, so but is more than merciful, so too you should be merciful, which is the most we humans can do. Yeah. By the way, the Rambam, when he quotes this halacha, Mahu Racham Afatahei Racham, he would translate it just as he does Rachamim, so you should do Rachamim. Just as he acts with Chayin, so you should act with Chayin. Yes.
What we see he does.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And the Rambam Mishnah Torah indeed quotes it that way. Yeah, just as he does acts of Rachamim, so too you should do Rachamim. Yeah.
But we know it's Rachamim because of our internal feeling that it's Rachamim.
Yeah, okay, so here we get on to a different point, which I'm not going to address now, which is what do we mean by Rachamim? What do we mean by moral and qualities and so on? So that's, yeah. And to what degree do we have moral intuition? To what degree is that godliness within ourselves and so on? That's a different discussion. An important one, very, very important one, but not what I'm talking about here. Okay, let's try and cover one more chapter, and then we'll stop for today. Gaon is the first to he talks about mitzvahs, of commandments. He makes a number of points, which again I think everyone here will think are obvious, but are not obvious. He makes the point that all mitzvahs have a purpose to them. And then he divides mitzvahs into so-called rational mitzvahs, which are known as sichliot, and received or revealed mitzvahs, which are known as shmiot, the word shemata here. So sichliot means mitzvahs from our seichel, from our reason, and shmiot means mitzvahs which we have received or heard from God. Now, you will say that these are distinctions known pre-Gaon. For example, chukim and mishpatim. Surely that's what a chuk means, and that's what a mishpat means. Well, not quite. It's not necessarily the way chuk and mishpat were understood always, and many other thinkers understand this terminology differently. You may say, well, either way, the distinction is obvious. There obviously are mitzvahs which we understand and mitzvahs which we don't understand. Again, not an obvious distinction. And let's go as most fundamentally as possible. You may say, well, it's obvious that all mitzvahs have a purpose. Maybe not. Maybe mitzvahs don't have a purpose. Maybe the purpose of the mitzvah is just the mitzvah itself, with no purpose to it. So let me just try and unpick all of that. We take it now as obvious that mitzvahs have a purpose. It's trying to do something, trying to change ourselves to become better people, more spiritual people, trying to change the world, improve the world, things like that. Now, if that's the case, then it means there's something more important than mitzvahs, which is what the mitzvahs are trying to affect in us. Now, we don't think of it often like that, but that's quite a revolutionary thought. I thought that mitzvahs are the most important thing to do. God commands us to do things. Mitzvahs are the most important thing to do. Well, it turns out, if mitzvahs have a reason, that they're not the most important thing to do. Because a reason always is something more important than them. There's something that lies behind them, which is the real goal and the real reason. So there's something quite revolutionary in the idea that mitzvahs have reasons. It turns out that mitzvahs are really just a tool or a means to achieve a certain goal. And if that's the case, maybe there are other means to achieve it. if I can identify what the reason behind the mitzvah is, the goal behind the mitzvah, then maybe I don't have to keep the mitzvah anymore, and I can get there through other methods. Could other people get to those outcomes through other mitzvahs, through other means? So this opens again a whole interesting can of worms around all of this. Yes, Amrom.
If you command them, and if you try and get pleasure of them, or try and get self-fulfillment of them, listen.
Yeah, and Leibovich is wrong. Yes. Okay, so we'll stop there. 3 words. Okay, I'll come back to Leibovich. Leibovich is definitely lurking in the background here, and I will come back to Leibovich. He's wrong in his interpretation of the Rambam. He's not wrong in that he's presenting, and he's entitled to do so, a very different picture of Torah. And it's definitely one lurking in the background. And I'll come to that in a moment. Okay, so let me we'll introduce Leibovich. So again, Rav Saadia Gaon says something which we kind of hear. So much of our thought we just sort of take for granted. Well, obviously, this is always what Jews have thought. Almost invariably, when people say everyone knows X or Judaism says Y, it's a wrong statement is going to follow, because Judaism is very complicated and thought, and it's not surprising because life is complicated. Human life is complicated. Humans relating to the infinite is complicated. So we have complicated squared. It's not surprising that, why is Halachos so complicated? Well, Halachos is trying to give us a guide how to live life, and life is complicated. It would be trite if it was otherwise. It would be superficial if it was anything else. Any system which is reputable has to have complications to it. I'll say, this is off topic, but there are people, and I'm not discussing going deep into the subject here. Don't like the fact that Judaism has makes halachic distinction between men and women in various ways. I would say if it didn't, we'd be in a mess, because anyone who thinks men and women are absolutely identical is misreading facts and reality. Now you can question, I don't like how Judaism draws the distinction. I don't like the message over here and over there. I don't understand why it's doing it. I think it's misogynist. I think there's all sorts of critiques that you can give of Judaism. I'm not claiming there's everything, but it has to reflect some basic facts of life and reality. Otherwise it would be untrue. So Judaism is very, very complicated. Rav Saadia Gaon, put that all inside in brackets, digression. Okay. Rav Saadia Gaon says something which nowadays we take for granted, but in it is something very invidious, something disturbing, which is there's something more important than mitzvahs. It also is disturbing because it can lead to limiting relationship with God. I thought Judaism is about submission to God, about service to God. Well, now it turns out it's really about me perfecting myself. It's really about perfecting the world. And by the way, this has gone very far in certain modern 21st century schools of thought, and 20th schools of thought, in which Judaism becomes fits very neatly into the American pop psychology self-help genre, right? Judaism is a wonderful self-help system, right? It's self-development, self-improvement, perfecting the world, taken on untaken very fast, and that whole sort of range of views. So this thought can lead to 2 problems. It can lead to going back to a human-centric universe rather than a God-centered universe, which surely is what Judaism is about. And it can lead to the idea that there's something more important than mitzvahs. And if there's something more important than mitzvahs, then can we get there throughout mitzvahs? Are mitzvahs so central? What happens if I have a clash of my moral values and mitzvahs? It opens a whole can of worms. Yes, Neil.
Saying that if one mitzvah doesn't, we're not aware of any outcome, then actually have one mitzvah.
Oh, okay. We'll come to that also. And what happens if you're convinced the mitzvah won't lead to outcome? So in Rav Saadia Gaon's statement is quite a lot of dangerous ideas. Now again, I don't want to pretend pre-Rav Saadia Gaon no one is somewhat aware of this, but no one spells it out in a sort of systematic, coherent manner in the way that Rav Saadia Gaon does. Chazal are already conscious of the dangers of Darshan Talmud Akra, speculating about the reasons behind mitzvahs and how it can lead you to break halacha. They talk about Shlomo HaMelech, right? The pasuk says a king shouldn't take many wives. The pasuk says a king shouldn't accumulate horses. Why? Because we want to limit royal power. We don't want the king to drive people back to Egypt, the sense of the horse trade. A king in halacha is very limited, right? They can't just be this tyrannical magnate with vast wealth and accumulate vast wealth and vast power and everything else. There's strict commandments. Shlomo HaMelech says, I'm capable of doing, I know that this halacha doesn't apply to me, because the purpose of the mitzvah is to keep someone grounded, to keep someone modest, to keep someone spiritual. It won't affect me. And of course, in the end it does, and even Shlomo HaMelech ends up sinning and so on. So Chazal are aware of the tension between Talmud Ikra and Halacha as a legal system, but Rishonim really brings this out, and in so doing, again, opens a whole genre of Jewish thought, which we've been obsessing about ever since. And does this lead to? By the way, I want to point out also that Rishonim makes the following point. Also, he says, we're not serving God because God needs our service. God is infinite. God has everything. God's all powerful. We already established that. He doesn't need human service. There were pagan theologies around in which they viewed service of the pagan gods as a bit like fans or football supporters. The football team needs you as a fan as much as you need them. The pop star needs you as a fan as much as, because ultimately you pay their salary, right? Ultimately your support is what empowers them to be popular, to have merchandise to sell tickets and so on. There were schools of thought that sort of saw the pagan gods as competing for influence. They needed the worshippers as much as the worshippers needed them, and it was a transactional relationship, like a quid pro quo. We'll look after you and do the stuff that only gods can do if you look after us and offer sacrifices and the like. Now, it's not obvious when you read the Torah that this isn't what the Torah is saying. The Torah does say that you're meant to be an Evet Hashem, etc. The Torah does seem to say that we're serving God and so on. So, again, another area where we don't read Torah like that in any way at all. And I'm not suggesting that Jews ever read it like that in the fullest sense of the word, but Gaon certainly introduces things which we take very for granted that if we think about them for a few moments are a little sensitive. We're running out of time, so we'll have to revisit this next week, but just to bring Leibovich into the picture, of course, Nechama Leibovich's equally famous brother argued that Judaism's gone completely awry. This idea of Judaism as a self-help manual, as about self-improvement, about improving the world, it removes godliness from Judaism, and we need to get back to what Judaism really is about, which is God told you to do this. Your job is to be humbly obedient and do what He says, and that's the extent of the truth we can ultimately say about Judaism. He spends many books saying this, but so I'm being unfair over here. But in Al Regel Achas, this is his argument that the deepest truth we can say is mitzvahs are about us humbly bowing and subjecting ourselves to God, and that's it. And this, he says, is a restoration of the true Lithuanian Misnagdit philosophy, pre the corruption of Hasidus sleeping in. This is the real philosophical truth, pre the corruption of Kabbalah ruining everything. And we just have to get back to Judaism is about obedience, and that's the extent of things and nothing else. Now, he also claims this is Rambam's view, and he's wrong. It's not Rambam's view. I'm not even going to do models and say my view. It's not the Rambam's view, and no one's view is it. Is it the Rambam's view? The Rambam and Rav Tzadok Gaon are on the same team, and in this sense, on the same team as the Kabbalists, which is there is a purpose to mitzvahs beyond the mitzvah itself. It's trying to affect a certain change in us. They may argue about what the nature of that change is, but this is what they say. I often say to people that as much as we talk about the argument between the philosophers and the Kabbalists, if you think about the full range of what Jews have held and could hold, if this is the full spectrum, the Kabbalists and the philosophers are over here on the spectrum. They're this sort of little wing. They're arguing over 5% on the edge. But there's another 95% that goes much further. And I'm including that Leibovich, right? He was an Orthodox Jew in the sense that, Orthodox Jew at least, in the sense that he kept mitzvahs. He was a man of reputable Torah mitzvahs observance. And I don't think he was in breach of any of the Ikrim in putting forward his views. I think he wasn't Chas v'Shalom a heretic, a kofar for so doing. But he presented a view which is extinct. It's not a view that anyone currently holds. And Rav Tzadok Gaon is an important figure in saying that. Next week we'll try and unpick a little bit more about what this revolution means. What is then the relationship between mitzvahs and the reasons that lie behind them, and this distinction between sichliot or rational mitzvahs and shmiyot, which are revealed mitzvahs? These gods we will get to that next week. I wish everyone a good day. Thank you so much for listening, as always. Good, thank you.